good evening to both Dr. Jackson and Prof. James. Thanks for joining me this evening. I know that, it's been a long day. Yeah. So Dr. Jackson is a family doctor. He's based in Bukit Jalil, and Professor James Koh is an infectious disease consultant physician based in the International Medical University, IMU. So it's great to have both of you on with us this evening to talk about a little bit of a hot topic for the that's been bothering a lot of Malaysians for the past few months, I think, which is basically the COVID-19 vaccines. I think before we delve directly into the topic, let's talk a little bit about the background to set a bit of a premise on the whole thing, right, guys? So what exactly is COVID-19? I think in terms of the semantics, in terms of the language, COVID-19 deals specifically with the actual infection that this virus, this coronavirus, actually causes. As with a lot of different pandemics, when we encounter new infectious diseases, it tends to be that the entire human race or the human civilization does not have an inherent immunity to them. And this commonly happens when certain viruses that are inherently infective in animals jump species to humans. So in this particular situation, what purported to have happened was that sometime around 2019, some coronavirus, which was inherently living in bat species, managed to somehow mutate and jump over to the humans. So that is the theory of how the whole COVID-19 situation started off. And I think both of you would agree with me that sometime around the end of 2019, when we were kind of preparing for our Christmas celebrations and year-end kind of wrapping up the year, we were hearing a lot of very disturbing news coming from this area in China called Wuhan, and about this very uncontrollable infectious disease that was getting very out of hand. And I think that was the initial news about COVID-19 that eventually spread worldwide from there. So coronavirus, why do they call it coronavirus? Because this particular type of virus, it's got little spikes on the body of this virus. So when you slice it in half, it looks a bit like a crown. And so corona in Latin means crown. And that's how they named the coronavirus. And it's not something that actually is very new in terms of danger to humans, because I think that as recently as a decade ago, even we've had two actually very significant close calls with two different types of strains of coronavirus, which were namely the SARS and the MERS-CoV. Prof, would you agree with me on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the time interval between the two roughly almost correspond to a decade, actually. So
yeah.
So this third virus is in the third decade. Sort of expect. You're sort of seeing one new virus every decade or so, almost a decade. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not reading into anything. It's just that it happens to be that way. Yeah.
Yeah, it so happened in a very sequential kind of manner. So it's not something that's new, and but definitely so happened that this time it was would I say more infectious, and the consequences of the infection kind of make it much easier to spread as a pandemic situation. And the whole condition of most parts of the world being highly globalized now, where people are so mobile, helps to actually spread the infectious disease very easily. Coronavirus, this particular COVID-19 infection it sits mainly in the airway, the upper airway, behind the nose in the nasopharynx and the throat. And it spreads mainly, from what we understand, through coughing out the droplets and in the air aerosolized in the air. And this is the main method in which this SARS-CoV-2 actually spreads from one person to the other person, and the chain of infection actually gets to continue. That's COVID-19 infection in a nutshell. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Jickee, perhaps?
Yeah, hi. All right, so I think, yeah, probably just want to mention that COVID actually just stands for Coronavirus Disease 2019. So it's for short, COVID-19. And there is no COVID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 18 before COVID-19. So it's just because it was first reported December of 2019. And that's our first case. Yeah. And ground zero was believed to be Wuhan. Yeah, more or less.
Yeah. I mean, you could argue that there's a lot of controversy about that point, but I think it's generally accepted in terms of the documentation that it started around there for now. Okay, so we have some interesting questions that perhaps either Prof or Dr. Jickee could address for us. In the immediate history, do any of you gentlemen remember how the COVID-19 infection actually reached our shores, and what was the progression like for us at that time?
For me, a personal experience, like end of the year 2019, December 2019 was our last family holiday. We were in Taiwan. So that's like the last family holiday for like probably the rest of our life for now. Hopefully
for now.
So yeah, I think at the time we were hearing there's this Wuhan case. So basically first reported in December 31st, actually, of 2019, reported to WHO. But the cases were already appearing in Wuhan, city of China. I think, so just going through what happened, generally, this case appears like a flu-like illness. About 80 to 90% of people will present with just cough, a bit of fever, body aches. And it can actually include other flu-like symptoms like runny nose, sore throat, abdominal pain, even diarrhea, and of course these are all optional. The main ones are actually, from what we've been seeing, mostly headaches, body aches, and a bit of cough. All right, and of the 80, so this is the 80-90%. A lot of people tend to be a bit asymptomatic. The funny thing about SARS-CoV-2 is that even when you're asymptomatic, or they call it pre-symptomatic, you actually start spreading the virus already, and that's why it spreads really fast. And then of course from there, about 10 to 20%, depending on which literature you're reading and where in the world you are, or what kind of demographics you fit into, you will actually progress to a severe form of the illness where it goes down to your lungs. You get viral pneumonia. So how did they find out that this is not just any pneumonia, right? So when they get admitted to hospital, okay, if you have friends who work in hospital, in the medical wards, the bread and butter of medical ward, right, medical department is pneumonia, right? We call it CAP, community acquired pneumonia, right? But when these patients appear with pneumonia, right, it's a lot more serious. And you notice that in the normal hospitals, when we get CAP, all right, most of them recover. All right, some don't even need oxygen, so maybe you just put a bit of nasal prong. You start your antibiotics, most often augmenting azithromycin, that cocktail, and most of them recover. I think a good 80-90% you just recover, right? But in this case, two-thirds will actually deteriorate to the point that you would need to intubate them. Means they start off, in a room air. You're not getting enough oxygenation. Their oxygen saturation drops below 95. It drops below 90%. You start them on some nasal prong, put a face mask, oxygen, and they still, keep deteriorating, right? So it's like, wait, these guys, they're a little bit more severe than your normal community-acquired pneumonia. And then when they do chest X-rays, they see extensive changes. The lung consolidation that you see with this illness, it's a lot more serious than what you usually see. So the abnormal thing is instead of 90% of people with pneumonia just recovering and getting discharged, you get about 2/3 that actually progress, worsen, and will require intubation. So that's where you put a blade in and you put a tube into your throat, down to your lungs, and plug you into a machine. They call it the ventilator. So that machine helps you breathe, right? Now, when you're put on a ventilator, you are moved to ICU. When someone who has lung pneumonia deteriorates to the point where they end up in ICU, a good portion of them actually recover. You don't go to the ICU department and see like of the 10 beds, 9 of them die. That doesn't happen. But in this case, once you've deteriorated to the point where you're intubated, right, this group, 50% will die. All right, and that's abnormal. So they knew that this is not nothing. Of course, they tested for your blood CNS. You try to culture your blood, to grow bacteria. Try to test for H1N1. All the tests came out negative. So they knew that. I think there was one Chinese doctor with a whistleblower, right? He realized that it's got to be a new illness, and he looked for it and he found it, right? So it's like, okay, it's a new type of virus, and yeah, so that's SARS-CoV-2 for you, as far as I know. So it was finally reported to WHO on the 31st of December 2019. Of course, by then it already spread everywhere because people are traveling everywhere. And again, like I said, a good portion of asymptomatic and pre-symptomatic patients would actually spread, although they are fine. And then next thing you know, it went everywhere. I think in Malaysia, probably in that case, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's around February. And by March, we had our first MCO, and the world changed for most of us.
I think it's still quite a vivid memory for most people. It was a very abrupt and a very surreal change. The streets were empty on a weekday, completely like a ghost town. This is something that probably would have stood out in our memory for many years to come.
So up to date, if you look at Worldometer, I think this was as of April 17 when I checked online. Confirmed COVID-19 infections number about 139 million people worldwide, and has resulted in nearly 3 million deaths. So yeah, it's not something we can don't worry about.
Yeah, it's pretty significant, isn't it? Right. So how do vaccines work? I think it really depends on the type of vaccine. It's probably also worth noting that vaccines are not only effective when you inject them into the person, but also that there's this concept of herd immunity that we can talk about later. Okay, for vaccines to work, the body's immune system, it has a memory to it. So there are certain cells in the body, in the immune system of our bodies, that help us to remember old previous infections. When the infection and we encounter it again for the second, third, fourth time subsequently after the first time, our body is more prepared, and we can mount a stronger immune defense against these germs whenever they attack us again. And however the vaccine works, at the end of the day, it leverages on this capacity of the body to actually remember these infections and be able to mount a stronger defense whenever they encounter the infection again, these germs again. So a little bit of a history lesson, a little bit of a history discussion before we go into how vaccines work per se. I think it's actually quite interesting to use the example of smallpox, which is actually a disease that ravaged humanity for hundreds and hundreds of years back in ancient times. And it's something that we hardly hear about anymore nowadays. And this is mainly because of the effectiveness of vaccinations. Now, this particular infection, smallpox, actually caused small little pustules to form all over the skin on people's bodies, and eventually they will succumb and die to this infection. And so as recently as 1000 AD, around that time period, there are very early records of Chinese actually using a method called variolation, which basically means they use these crusts from the smallpox infection. They grind them up into little dust powder, and they blow it into the nose of healthy people. So this method, which they call as variolation, actually helped those people who were well to maintain some level of immunity to smallpox, because what they realized was that those people that recovered from smallpox, they didn't actually get the smallpox anymore. And that was actually the very early humanity realizing that the body's immune system actually had that memory that we were talking about earlier. So fast forward a few hundred years later, there was a English physician called Edward Jenner, Dr. Edward Jenner. And Dr. Edward Jenner realized that in the milkmaids that were milking particular cows, whenever the cows got a very similar infection to smallpox called cowpox, and the maids contracted this cowpox, they were then immune to the smallpox infection after that. And this was actually an old wives' tale during that time. But Dr. Edward Jenner actually thought, hey, he could be onto something. So he actually inoculated a child with some cowpox virus, and he experimented by exposing the child to some smallpox, and the child didn't get smallpox. So ethics aside for that time,
I was going to say that. Do you get consent? Do you read the consent form?
It was a different time, so I guess different rules are slightly applied, but it was for the general good, and it's thank goodness it worked out well. And what happened was that there was immunity. So that was actually the first concept of how vaccination came about, and from there on it caught on. And the doctors decided, okay, let's manufacture it. Let's make it purer form. From there on, vaccination became more widespread, and actually smallpox was able to be eradicated. And if you actually look at most Malaysians, if you actually look at your shoulder, your arms, you find that there's a little bit of an indentation there. That's actually a sign of one of the vaccinations that we had to go through as a child. BCG probably, which helped us to vaccinate against tuberculosis infection. So what I'm trying to say is that vaccinations are something which is not new to us, and most of us have undergone some type of vaccination already at this point. So back to how vaccines work, I think it depends on the mechanism of how they work. There are a few types of vaccination that are more common. I think particularly when we talk about COVID-19 vaccinations, there's the mRNA one, there's the adenovirus method as well, which is the hot topic now, AstraZeneca vaccine, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think going back a bit into history again.
Yeah.
I'm also a lecturer, so when I teach medicine to the students, I usually bring up some part of history to make people realize that we have a very significant legacy and inheritance from people who have gone before us, and they've made great strides in science and medicine and brought us to where we are today. In terms of vaccine, I think if you ask the question, why is a vaccine called a vaccine? I wonder if you ever wonder that. Why can't we call it something else? Why can't it be called Transformers or something? That's because back to the story of Edward Jenner again, that the organism that causes the cowpox is actually called variola vaccinia. So when Edward Jenner first described this particular organism that caused cowpox, and when he was honored eventually by Louis Pasteur, I think all of us know who is Louis Pasteur. All our milk are pasteurized. That's another great stride, making milk safe to drink. they decided to retain the word vaccine to cover all present and future, concoctions that is meant to protect us against infections. So that's a bit of history. Now, since then, I think we have made a lot of strides. I think in the time of Edward Jenner, nobody knows that it is a virus. I think he just takes some parts from the cowpox and just give it to the kid. Of course, like what Phew said earlier, probably very unethical in this day and age, right? I mean, if I'm a child, I would probably sue him. Anyway, but day and age, I think we have come a long way. There are various ways to make vaccines now. The traditional, so-called traditional ways, we take parts of the identified microorganism and inoculate into a person, and then see how it works, right? So I'm just putting it very simply. So you take basically some parts of a bacteria or a virus, and then introduce it into a person who is not immune. One example would be our tuberculosis or BCG vaccine, where it takes a particular part of protein derivative. So another way is to take the actual virus and make it inactivated. We sort of take away its potency somehow by chemical means or whatever means, and then we introduce that virus, which is now inactivated, meaning it is not going to cause a real infection, but it does contain all the particles or all the shape and size and look of the original virus, and you put it into the body, and then the body, as Confu had earlier described, how our body builds antibodies that would remember to fight the real infection when it comes eventually, or if it comes eventually. So that's another traditional way of doing things. And then over the years, we have devised various ways, and I think now people get very about newer techniques. Imagine like what Pfizer does, or what Moderna does. It is that they create RNA, genetic material, and they introduce it into the cell, into the body. And what this RNA does, it makes your cell produce a spike protein, right? But this process is very transient, lasts only a couple of days, and then the RNA is degraded. But that 3 days is enough for the body to build antibodies, which will be effective for the real infection to come. Other companies are using other innovative ways, like using viruses from chimps or chimpanzees or simians, as we call it, and they use this virus and they transport again a genetic material into your body, and again that genetic material will cause spikes to be built into the surface of the cells, again triggering an immune response. We call it making of antibodies, immune response. Now we get scared. We are very. But if I have a time machine, I take you back several decades before this, and I tell you, look, guys, we have tuberculosis here, right? And people are dying left and right from TB. I have a vaccine, and guess what? This vaccine is taken from the actual bacteria that causes tuberculosis. I'm taking a part of it and I'm giving it to you, right? They will have exactly the kind of fear, the kind of wariness, the kind of, they say, I've never heard of this. This is crazy. I mean, this is stupid. How can you give me a protein from a bacteria that actually causes TB? Are you out of your mind? So several decades ago, they would say that kind of thing, right? But since then, we have so many vaccines. We have vaccines against TB, polio, rubella, measles, cholera. We have vaccines against hepatitis B, C, so many vaccines made from different ways, and we have accepted them I don't know whether you can accept it because when you're given, you're just a baby, but definitely your parents have accepted it and there was no fuss, right? Still, I mean, every time a new thing comes, we would, and it's justifiable, we all would be apprehensive, we have some anxiety. But I think we as doctors, and I like to convey this to the community as well, that we do look at data, we look at evidence before we are convinced about anything. So that's my bit on vaccines. Thanks.
Yeah. So I just wanted to add one thing. So one way of getting herd immunity or trying to eradicate a virus, as Hong Fui and Prof has mentioned, is that by vaccination, right? Actually, it's not the only way. The other way was by natural immunity. Okay, this is tricky. So like a lot of people like, I can get the infection.
Controversial, isn't it?
Yeah, I get the infection. If I survive, I may be immune to it, even for smallpox. So one way is to get injection, get the vaccine. The other way is to get infected and survive. So the thing is, you can get immunity after you survive. So I just quickly Googled just now. For smallpox, the major, there's minor and major. So the major one, mortality is 30%. All right. So it's like 1 in 3 of you will die. All right. And then real quickly, smallpox is estimated to have killed 300 million people in the 20th century and around 500 million people in the last 100 years of its existence. So yeah, if you want to go and not vaccinate and just have a smallpox party, that's what you're going to expect. 1 in 3 of you guys will die.
Right.
Same thing if you're going to do that for most diseases as compared to vaccination. Another thing about herd immunity is that some people is like, okay, let's just try to get natural immunity, right? I think all through history, we've only been able to eradicate one illness, and that is smallpox. And the only way to eradicate a disease all through history is by vaccination. By natural infection and immunity, we have never been able to eradicate anything, right?
That is so
Spanish flu, yeah, everything, your measles, your rubella, your mumps, everything until now we cannot eradicate.
Can I also add to that, Jackson? In the event that, let's say we did try our luck and we wanted to go ahead and try to do that race to get ourselves immune through natural infections, what would the actual human cost be for that? In terms of ethics and actual cost of human life, is it a price worth paying for that? Use that pathway to get herd immunity, is it worth it?
In the beginning of the pandemic last year in March or April, some countries decided to adopt the herd immunity strategy. To remember in the and they decided to go ahead and say, well, let's just get the whole population infected with COVID, and then we'll just go about our daily lives and we'll just go about doing what we like to do or want to do, and just let everybody get infected, and then you have herd immunity. And that didn't last very long because, like what Kong Fui say, what is the human cost of this? People are dying at a much higher rate, and so after a very short while, thankfully, most of this government have backtracked and decided that that's not the way to go. I think that's a good lesson for all of us to learn. It doesn't work that way, and some countries have tried it and it was quite disastrous.
Thanks for weighing in on that, Prof. I think it's probably worth noting as well that the way that the vaccination achieves the immunity for the individual is not at the cost of the individual getting sick. So that's the key difference. I feel that if you're not sick with that infectious disease, then you will not be able to be infectious and continue that chain of infection, so on and so forth. So that's the main difference in why vaccination is slow and steady, but a more realistic way of being able to achieve that herd immunity. Okay, having spoken about the how the mechanisms of the vaccine and how they work, vaccines do work. However, after having taken the vaccine, it doesn't mean that you're 100% foolproof to not be able to get the COVID-19 infection. So after taking the vaccinations, it's noteworthy to actually say that the SOPs, adherence, social distancing, washing your hands and all that still have to be maintained, at least for the perceivable future. Until the time that we have actually achieved this herd immunity, where we are able to kind of have enough immune people to protect those that are not able to be immunized through vaccination or previous infection, then we can't actually effectively block the chain of infection. We will have to adhere to SOP and maintain our social distancing until then.
Yeah, so maybe I just want to add, so on top of vaccination, why we still need to do the SOP where you avoid large crowds unless absolutely necessary, why we still put on a face mask, social distance, 1 meter, hand washing, which is good whether or not there's a pandemic. Even with or without your vaccine, you should do all these things, right? And there's this model, we call it the Swiss cheese model. So if you look at the Swiss cheese, right, it's like this cheese with a lot of holes in it, right? So imagine layers of Swiss cheese blocking, well, maybe a positronic emission or something is shooting through, right? So if the first cheese you go through that particular hole, because the hole is there, right? It's the first step is face mask, right? It goes through that, it goes to the other cheese, the hole appears at a different place, so it might block it, right? Well, it's like by some chance, 2 holes appear in the same place. You go to the next layer of cheese, which is hand washing, right? It gets blocked because, so all the layers of protection, so that's what we call the Swiss cheese model. So vaccination, it actually reduces transmission as well, but by about 50-60% for the Pfizer one. So it's not 100%, right? So on top of that, if you wear a face mask, your risk of transmission reduces even more. If you stay 1 meter apart, even better, right? I think a good analogy would be, or if you wear a seatbelt, is that enough? Can you run the red light? You still shouldn't run the red light. You should still drive at the speed limit. You should still, open your eyes and look around and be aware when you drive. You should have a proper license, right, on top of the seatbelt. So, and you make sure that the brakes are working. So all the layers of safety, we need to adhere to as well. So it's not just, okay, I got seatbelt, so run the red light. Not enough. Yeah, not good.
Absolutely. I totally get that, Jackson. Now, I think let's talk a little bit about the current scenario in Malaysia. As of today's date, I think there are a few vaccines that are going to be planned in the pipeline to be given out for the Malaysian public. And so currently in the rollout is the Pfizer vaccines. And very, very soon to be, as of today's date, AstraZeneca and also SinoVac. I think that, having talked about the mechanism of action of the different vaccines, it's probably worth noting that all 3 of these vaccines work in very different ways. And probably the current existing data that we have about the level of protection that each of these vaccines give is also a little bit different. Pfizer provides about 95%, correct me if I'm wrong, protection rates. For SinoVac, we're just not quite sure. There's a lot of mixed data. And for the AstraZeneca, it's somewhere around 60%-ish.
It's about 80 around.
80.
More than 80, yeah.
Okay, 80%.
As AstraZeneca, I read up recently, it's between 60 to 90%. So it's 60%.
I mean, just like the SinoVac, it really depends on where the trial
study is being done.
Yeah, so they will say that it's 60% if the first dose is a full dose, followed by the second dose, which is also a full dose. But then they found out that if the first dose is given half dose, then the overall immunity increases because the vector vaccine, because your body reacts to the vector itself, and your immune system actually attacks the vector. So the second dose, the efficacy drops. So when they found out that if you give half dose for the first jab, suddenly it shoots up to 90%. So that's an interesting thing. Up to you guys whether you want to add this or not. Yeah.
Okay, that is indeed interesting. Actually, I was not aware of that also. So 3 different types of vaccinations available at this date, and 3 different techniques to get that immunity. But at the end of the day, all 3 of them help to promote that memory for your immune system.
I mean, let me chime in at this point. I had a webinar with some friends a couple of months ago, and one of the questions raised to me was, he was doing it in a joking way, and he says, if I put a gun to your head and ask you to choose which vaccine will you take, which one will you choose? And that was, if you remember, it's just a couple of months ago, and at that time there was a lot of talk about the Pfizer vaccine being brought in, and then there was the SinoVac being brought in. AstraZeneca wasn't in the picture at the time. And so I essentially had 2 answers, A or B. Right? C, of course, is I don't want to be vaccinated, but I do want to be vaccinated. And I said, well, I will choose the Pfizer one. And he says, why? Why do you want to choose the Pfizer vaccine? And my response to him was that, I have studied the data on Pfizer vaccine because it's been published everywhere. Widely available, and I'm convinced that it worked. And why did I not choose SinoVac? Am I anti-Chinese? No, because at that point of time, the data from SinoVac wasn't widely available, and so I based my decision on data, on evidence. And I think that's how logical human beings should behave. We should look at data and evidence, and then make an informed decision. Means you know the facts, and then you decide. You may even decide not to have any of them, but I think it is good to do a bit of research and then decide for yourself at the end of the day, right? And I think that's one of the main objective of our session here today also is to just present the data as it is. We tell you what we think as professionals, and we know what we're talking about. Yeah, and then we've done the homework sometimes, a lot of homework for you, and then just present it to you, and then you can make a decision. So back to this whole issue of which vaccine is better. I think to make a comparison, I think Kong-Fu had earlier said that Pfizer 95%, AstraZeneca anything between 60 to 80 or 90, depending, and the SinoVac again, depending on which study you're looking at, ranges to something from 50 something to almost 80, even 90. Yeah? Initially, if you hear what the Chinese scientists have declared. So we have very varying efficacies. We call it efficacies. What it essentially means is that for a vaccine to be called an effective vaccine, they just need to be 50% effective, right? That's the standard we set. And then that's how we look at it, all right? And I think all these vaccines are effective because they have shown efficacy past 50%. That's how I look at vaccines, And then I look at the data in a deeper way, and I say, well, what exactly do you want to protect? What exactly do you want to prevent, isn't it? We have this term that was used to be very popular in the past, not so popular anymore. It calls YOLO. For the longest time, I have no idea what is YOLO, right? It says you only live once, right? Okay, or lie once, I don't know which one, but you only live once, right? And so life is precious. I think all of us, like it or not, are afraid of dying, actually, right? Of death. I think a lot of energy investment money has gone into trying to prolong life through whatever mechanism, right? Even if you can't live forever, you want to preserve your genes forever, your ovaries, and when you're born, they want to take the cells from your the child's umbilicus and preserve it. All these are, if you look at it in a nutshell, they're just ways and means to prolong life because you only get it once. I think the heart of hearts of all of us, we are afraid of dying, right? And I think it's very gratifying if you read all the data for the vaccines that all three vaccines are 100% effective against death from COVID-19. I think that's very reassuring. I think the other two thing is that not only that, they are also effective preventing severe illness against COVID-19. You don't get severe illness. You don't die. They don't promise that you won't get COVID. They won't promise that you won't have fever or headache. Things that we can live with, things that we could tolerate, we could bear with it. But they do have 100% protection against death and severe disease, right? So sometimes when we look at data, we get so scared, like the AstraZeneca. A lot of people have played up a lot of hoo-ha over very, very small incidents of blood clots, right? And so that caused a lot of fear. And I'm not going to say the fear is not justified. It is very justified. If somebody told me that if I get into a car, there is a chance of me banging a tree with that particular brand of a car, I will not buy it. Even though I live in a desert where there are no trees, I will still not buy that car because somebody told me that as soon as I get into the car, I will have a chance of banging in a tree. Whether there's a tree there or not, it doesn't cross my mind. It just says that this car is no good. That's already implanted in my head, right? Unfortunately, that has happened not just in Malaysia, but in every part of the world. Right? So I'm not going to try and convince you to take the AstraZeneca. I'm not going to tell you that, oh, well, if you take the birth control pill, you actually have higher chance of getting clots, or if you're a smoker, you also have a higher chance of getting a clot than from AstraZeneca. I won't even go as far as to say that if you get COVID, you actually have much, much higher chance of getting a blood clot from COVID compared to AstraZeneca. All these are true actually. And there's no way I can change your mind because that information is in the head and it's very hard to change the psyche, right? So what I can tell you is that the vaccine works, right? And it's become a choice. And I think that's a very wise decision because now it allows people who have weighed the evidence and data, and then they decide, yes, I will still take it despite that 0.0008% of chance of getting a blood clot. I will take it. So I think that's how we go about telling people, that this is how our vaccines work. I also want to put into perspective that talking about herd immunity, which we have covered just now, is that if we don't vaccinate people fast enough or quickly enough, we allow the virus to mutate. And when they mutate, vaccines may not work. Just to give an example, now at the moment we have three main variants that we are concerned about. One is from Brazil, South Africa, and from England or United Kingdom. And all three are becoming a problem in those countries because they seem to be more transmittable. They seem to cause worse illnesses. I just want to put things into perspective. We have a pandemic in December 20. Not even pandemic at the time, was in Wuhan. Pandemic was declared in March or April, I can't remember. But just say we take that part as the beginning of the pandemic. All these mutations were detected by September, October, November of last year. it only took that many months to get a variant that is highly infectious, a lot of fatality, and cause a lot of problems. Right? And just a few months, that's all it needs. And if you look at our country, it's very small. We have only 30 million population. I was just joking to my daughter that day, if we were India, 300,000 cases per day, it will just take them 100 days to cover the whole population of Malaysia. That's it. That's it for us, just to give a perspective, that's it for us. We're going to allow this virus in our community to a chance to mutate. And we cannot allow that to happen. Just to put that into perspective. And I think if the guy were to put the gun to my forehead again now and ask me which of the vaccine I will take, I will say any of them.
Yeah.
So a couple of months ago, I would say, well, I'm going to take the Pfizer. But if the same guy comes and I'm not immunized yet, I've been immunized. But if I'm not immunized and the same person points a gun to my head, ask me the same question now, and I will just tell him any of them is fine for me.
Yeah, probably just to add on, maybe to increase the confidence of our audience watching this, right? That vaccines are safe, very easy. I don't want to be presumptive, but all of us in this video forum, all of us have received the vaccine, right?
Yes, we have.
Yeah, and we're all fine. Like no third arm, right?
Yeah.
Right. So if I remember dinner last year, Chinese New Year, again with some classmates, and they asked me. That time I was, quite foolish, I think. And at that time, most of the cases were confined to Wuhan. And they were asking me, my friends were asking me, if the infection comes to Malaysia, how long will it last? Right? How long will this epidemic last? And I very foolishly say, well, by June, it should be over, right? Thank God I didn't say which year, June, right? It could be June anytime in the future though, right? So always don't commit yourself. Right. Anyway, I said June. I very much regret my words. And I do remember a few webinars I have done March last year, which I would be quite embarrassed to view it again because there was a time where I thought mask wearing was not necessary, right? I actually, went quite public and say, you don't really need to wear a mask if you are not symptomatic. And that kind of advice helped through for many of the diseases that we have. That if you are symptomatic, you wear a mask, you actually essentially could protect other people, And then, but science went on to show that I was very wrong, and I was very willing to change. And I think that's another hallmark that as a logical human being should be. I'm speaking like Spock actually, that we will base our decisions on evolving knowledge, like what Jackson said earlier, we found out that people who are not symptomatic could spread it, and people who are pre-symptomatic are the most infectious. So then mask wearing became very pertinent and very important. And that's why our government has mandated that everybody wears a mask, whether you are symptomatic or not. And I changed overnight, declare on my social media and say, well, from this day onward, I'm going to encourage everybody to wear masks. And then I think, and there's another thing that was in the conversation at Chinese New Year dinner was that when will vaccine come, They're asking me as if, I could see the future. And I say, for real, I was telling them that based on what I knew at that time, I said, well, few years, I think. And they go, ayo, that's so horrible, that's so long to wait. We have to wear masks for 3 years, 4 years. That's crazy. Lo and behold, by the fourth quarter of last year, Pfizer said, oh, well, we got the vaccine now. And then most of us went from, despair of not getting a vaccine. And then we hear that we got a vaccine. And now we've turned into cynics and go like, sure, boy, can believe or not. I mean, this is ridiculous. How can you make a vaccine so fast? Cannot lah. This is not possible, right? Yes.
I think what a lot of people fail to realize is that the process of developing the vaccine itself can be expedited in many ways because a lot of parts can actually be done concurrently. And the world needs it. So the funds were available, and they literally went into like super overdrive to develop this vaccine. So it's a real shame.
Operation Warp Speed.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So people really work overtime. We don't know the background of how hard people worked. I've just finished rewatching the 8 seasons of Game of Thrones, and just yesterday, and I was watching the reunion for the cast of Game of Thrones hosted by Conan O'Brien, and there were more than 700 crew, and we were only seeing only that few actors every time. These are the crew that have made the minutest details of the costume, built replicas of castles and dragons and all that, which we enjoyed so much. But we never think about all that background work of hundreds and thousands of people who work on that show. So similarly, towards the end of the year, last year, and then we hear, wow, Pfizer is coming. And then within a couple of days, Moderna came out and said, we also have a vaccine, And then Astra came out, and then the Chinese, not to be left out, and say, yeah, we also have a vaccine. So suddenly it became like a vaccine festival. Everybody has a vaccine now. And many of us in the medical professions started rejoicing. I think that because there's actually a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. Whereas in the community, you can see a sense of some will rejoice, many, I would say, are cynics, and some are actually in disbelief. Whereas a small part has gone over time and started the anti-vaccination thing. So yeah, people respond to this kind of news differently.
I really agree with like what Prof said also about the whole your ideas were different at the beginning, and then sometimes we're wrong. And that's the beautiful thing about science, is because when you get more evidence and when you're confronted with more data, you're actually able to change your stand, which is compared to someone's like, I believe like this, and this is the hill I want to die on, and nothing can change my mind. That's a whole different thing. But the beauty about science is when you find out more, when you are confronted with evidence, you can actually change your mind according to data. And that's what I noticed when I asked certain uncle, aunties, right, what vaccine you want, which one you think you will take. And they'll be like, oh, I want to take China one. Why? Because I think China very good country, very strong country. Or, they say like, oh, Pfizer, because the company is make a lot of money, they make the Viagra also. Or they don't want to take Pfizer because the CEO very corrupt, probably just want to earn money, buy another Ferrari or things like that. But it's not based on science. It's not like, oh, because this one the efficacy is better, or because this one has a high risk of anaphylaxis, or this one has a low chance of any side effect. They're not talking about things like that. They're talking about, oh, because China a very good country, or US, Trump no good lah.
It's
nothing to do. Nothing to do with the vaccine at all. And even coming back to, I think what Prof said, I had the same thing at the beginning of the year. Thankfully, it wasn't a webinar. It was just me and my wife. And I would tell my wife, like, I don't think this virus not anything to be worried about. Then when it came, right, I think February around there, right, I would tell her, it's like, you know what, I think we get more deaths from dengue every day. The mortality for dengue is higher. The mortality for heart attack and stroke, all this is also higher. I don't think this is anything to worry about.
It was a gradual process. It slowly dawned on all of us that, oh crap, what's happening, you know. We're really dealing with a pandemic, you know.
I was in that same camp where it's like, you know, please only keep the mask for the frontliners, the doctors in the hospital need to wear masks. Yeah, same. I had the same thing. And then as evidence came, I changed my mind.
Yeah, same. I also openly, I was actually just about 2 days before the first MCO, they announced the total lockdown. I was giving a sharing at one of my panel offices, and during that time, they straight out asked me, do you think we should wear masks? And I told them at the moment, experts recommend not to, you know.
Yeah.
So I actually told them no need also. Yeah, I said, if you have, it's good to wear, but you don't go and kill yourself and try to drive all the way to go and buy a mask. And I had to, you know, we all had to eat our words after that.
Yeah. But that's the thing, they don't realize that the flip-flop policy from WHO, it wasn't because they were flip-flopping. I mean, it contributed to the trust deficit. That everyone's like, hey, I don't trust them really. Like, why do you keep getting things wrong? But they didn't realize that it was because when data came and evidence came and we learned more about the disease, they were changing policies not because of like politics or anything like that. It was because of evidence. Yeah.
I think the evidence was very robust. We'll all remember that there was that graph, right, that shows the different countries that wore masks all the way, and the graph that shows all the countries that didn't wear and the rate of infection, and it's so dramatically different, you know, for those countries that are wearing and we're not wearing.
On the other hand, our listener might say, well, you are telling me this now, and 1 year down the road, some fellows who have received the Pfizer did grow a third hand and, you know, turn blue or something. And then now you're telling me, you know, so that's another perspective. But I think you need to put things into context. Like we have essentially 3 public health strategies to minimize transmission of COVID. We say wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance. And these 3, initially, even the public health people were saying you don't have to wear a mask, right? Now we have 3. Initially, we have 2. But then if you look at it, the other 2 have stood the test of time. We have not changed our stance at all because there is no new evidence to suggest that washing hands does not help. There's no new evidence to say, so if you social distance, it doesn't help, because it does. So yeah, we are logical people, I say. If you look at data and you say, well, it's been a year, there's nothing to suggest that this tool doesn't work. Actually, it worked. The only thing that changed was the wearing of masks from not wearing to actually wearing a mask. And it still stands now. So I think that's how we at least for us, medical or professionals, that's how we function. We base on the latest data. So at this very point of time, all 3 of us have got the vaccine.
Yep.
We have not grown a third hand.
Nope.
And so at this point of time, we can assure you that we are well. That's all we could do. I cannot see in the future, right? But if you don't vaccinate, we may not have that future actually.
Correct. Time is against this pretty much. I think one of the questions, at least for me in my practice, that we commonly encounter is that some of the patients that I see who are on long-term medications, especially things like anticoagulants, blood pressure medications, you know, for their heart problems and so on and so forth. They ask me, Doc, I'm on these long-term medications. Is it going to affect the vaccination? What do you guys think? Dixon, you can go first, primary care. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think for me, okay, if you're taking anticoagulant or you're taking antiplatelet or whatever medication for your chronic illness, it's for a good reason. It's to prevent something serious from happening. So if you get, like, you stop your anticoagulant and get a stroke or a heart attack, it can be very, very fatal. So most likely you shouldn't stop the medication just because your neighbor told you to, or your auntie told you to, or someone WhatsApp something and told you that you should stop antiplatelet. No. But the best person to ask is your primary physician, the person who's in charge of that particular illness. So if you have a heart problem, you're taking anticoagulant, then you should ask your cardiologist. So you have a kidney problem, ask your nephrologist, should I stop this or what? If you have SLE or autoimmune disease, you ask your rheumatologist and whether I can stop my steroids or methotrexate or chemo. Chemo is a good question. I think if you're on chemo, it's very complicated. You cannot simply ask anyone or my neighbor or auntie or uncle, should I stop my chemo? Things like that. It should be decided. Yeah.
Eventually, the main thing that you need to probably address would be the thought process of is taking the medication off going to be dangerous, or is going to cause any risk to my health, and is this risk going to be worth it, or rather is the risk going to be higher than the benefit of taking it off or not?
Yeah, I think there are two ways to look at it. I agree with Jackson. We are not actually, don't think that any of us are trying to shift the responsibility to someone else. It's not because we don't know the answer, but it's always because we do not know as much about your condition as your primary physician or specialist who's looking after you. I think the response for each of these questions has to be individualized because it all really depends on how fit you are or how suitable you are, or to take the vaccine. I think it has to be individualized, and I think the best person to ask would be the person who is been caring for you. In the event that your specialist or your primary physician says, well, you can't take the vaccine, and that's when herd immunity comes in. That's when the rest of us who are listening to this session comes into play, because when you vaccinate, you protect these people who wants the vaccine but they cannot take the vaccine for whatever reasons. And I think that's how things work.
Yep. I think it's a very fascinating concept, herd immunity, because at the end of the day, vaccination, inadvertently, yes, it is about an individual's own body and what we subject it to, but it's also social responsibility kind of a perspective. It's not only about the individual's body, actually. It's about being able to protect the people in your community as well, and your loved ones, of course. So one of the other questions that's very common that we come across, we know that the current vaccines need a series of injections, most of them, except for probably the Johnson & Johnson one. But we don't know whether we will be needing any boosters for this particular vaccine or not just yet. The data just isn't sufficient to tell us whether we need the booster or not. Now, one of the questions that actually was very interesting that was asked to me was, Doctor, if we take let's say, for example, we take the Pfizer and we complete the series of vaccination for Pfizer initially, and we had to take a booster. There are so many other brands around. Is it okay? Is it acceptable? Is it safe to take another brand of vaccination for the COVID-19 infection later on in the future?
Some emerging evidence to suggest that after you finish completing your primary vaccination, that you can actually use a different brand, right? And in fact, some of the countries now that I'm aware of are even asking the citizens to use a different brand because they have received one brand and then they're going to use a different brand. And I can foresee that we will most likely need boosters. So then it comes the questions of, can I use a different brand when my booster comes? So if you look back into our experience, and we look back in our experience and practice in the past, we have precedents, we have different manufacturers of different vaccines. For instance, in my profession, I'm an infectious disease specialist, and some of my patients do not respond to one particular brand of hepatitis B vaccine. So when we give them that vaccine, they don't produce antibody for whatever reasons. And what we do is we again revaccinate that person with a different brand made by a different company and see whether that person respond to the different brand and produce antibodies, right? Sometimes people can get vaccinated and do not produce antibodies for whatever reasons, right? It can happen. It has happened before, and it can happen. It may even happen with this COVID vaccine. You may not produce antibodies. So far, we have not had any reports as such, but who knows? They might be one or two cases. So it can happen. Again, like what I say, if that happens, then you will again fall into the group in the community which needs to be protected by others who have vaccinated themselves.
Yeah, another good example would be flu vaccine. Every year we get a flu jab, right? And you actually never ask what brand you're getting. Sometimes it's from a different company and sometimes from a different company. And in fact, it's always a different strain anyway, and there's never been a problem. Even right now, I think in some countries where they, either because they couldn't get enough stock for the second jab, or like in a case where France, they decided to stop completely AstraZeneca. After the first jab, the second jab, they just give second dose is actually given Pfizer. And the science shows that that wouldn't be an issue because you take so the vector vaccines, they contain a DNA within the adenovirus, right? The vector that brings it to your cell. And it basically tells your cell to produce the spike protein. Your antibody, your immune system recognizes the spike protein and, primes itself against the spike protein in a real SARS-CoV-2 virus and attack that when they see that, right? So when you talk about doing a booster shot or a second shot, it's to remind your body this is what a spike protein looks like. So if you take the Pfizer one, the mRNA vaccine also tells your body to produce a sample of spike protein again to remind your body this is a spike protein. Attack it when you see it. So still okay. If you want to go further, even you take SinoVac. SinoVac is attenuated vaccine, weakened attenuated, pretty much killed vaccine. So what they do is a killed virus. So they put the entire virus there. So when your body, the immune system come across the dead virus, all the parts of the virus are there, including the spike protein. So again, it will tell your body, remind your antibodies, your immune system, what the spike protein looks like, how you should recognize it, and how you should attack it. So theoretically, shouldn't be a problem. Of course, we follow the policy. Government, you can't choose what vaccine you get, and the vaccine that you get, you will follow through the second dose. But the year after this, I imagine that this hopefully will become an endemic instead of a pandemic. So whether you choose to take a booster shot would be like the flu vaccine. It will be your choice. If you want to take it, take it. If you don't want to take it, don't take it. By then you could choose whatever brand you want. And I can imagine what will become popular is they're coming out with a vaccine where you don't have to jab, right? It's going to be a nasal spray one, right? So I can imagine if I'm going to take a booster next year, I'd rather have a nasal spray. I'm not going to jab myself.
So history is taking us full circle back to variolation again. Now, there's actually a type of dangerous infective protein that in previous history has been able to infect the nervous system of individuals. You could call it a rogue type of protein. It's called a prion, and there's been some talk that by injecting the Pfizer vaccine and you're introducing this foreign protein into your body system, you can actually stimulate the development of these prions, these rogue proteins that come about and mess up the nervous system and cause neurodegenerative disorders. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I've received quite a few WhatsApp
from
people who I remember one particular message has been circulated quite widely. It belongs to a website that traditionally has been notorious for putting out news that are either partially substantiated or not substantiated. So I had a look at the articles that they quoted. There were two articles, and whenever I read a news that says, "Oh, confirm as this" and all that, spread the word around and all that, I'm very skeptical. right? Because they use words that are what we will call as clickbait. You want to know more.
Correct.
So I think one thing about neurodegenerative diseases or Alzheimer's and all that is that they take a very long time to develop. They take years, even decades. And Pfizer vaccine is not even 1 year old. I don't know how in the world they could have confirmed that a vaccine, which is not even 1 year old, could cause or potentially cause a disease that would take years and decades to develop. I don't know how that happens, right? So, and the other article that they mentioned, that scientists just merely describe that there are evidence that they could be remnants of these proteins left, but they don't say that it causes the Alzheimer's, nor it causes neurodegenerative disorders. What this WhatsApp article is they're trying to take A and then they try to take B and then trying to merge it together and give you an information.
So it's very much a kind of an extrapolation, if you will, without
extrapolation. If you ask me, then I'll have to travel to the future and come back and tell you whether it does.
It's just not possible.
It's not possible for me to tell you. But that article, I would really I would read it very, very skeptically. I think that's how we all should behave as responsible citizens. Whenever you get a news or anything that is sensational, do a bit of homework, do a bit of research, and if the words are just too big and too bombastic, then maybe ask people and people who are in the know and or attend webinars like this, sessions like this, that would help to clarify your doubts.
Can mRNA vaccines essentially alter our DNA
and turn you into X-Men
or Spider-Man or something like that? Yeah. Is it possible? Yeah.
Okay. So it's not possible. Yeah, it's not possible. I think the science is very strong on this end because the mRNA vaccine, how it works is so the injection contains basically mRNA, messenger RNA, is just a single strand coded information. So and it's 3D printed, doesn't contain any part of the virus at all. It's synthetically created in the lab. So they just get all the codes together to form this line of information. It's wrapped in a lipid nanoparticle, right? So that goes into your body. It through endocytosis, it goes into the cell, right? It doesn't enter the nucleus, so it doesn't disturb your DNA.
So
cannot affect your human genome.
For the for the benefit of everyone, the nucleus of the cell is the core part of the cell where your DNA is contained, and that is really the part that the RNA, these instruction proteins, don't actually get to affect. So in essence, I think what Dr. Jickee is trying to say is that the nucleus gets untouched. So our DNA, our core DNA, our instructions that make us who we are actually don't get altered at all by these foreign external RNA instruction proteins.
So the mRNA vaccine, we have to ship it in an ultra cold temperature, right? At negative 75 degrees. Why? Because the mRNA, the lipid nanoparticle is very fragile. So you put it outside for a while, it just self-destruct. So when the nanoparticle delivers the mRNA into the body of the cell, the cytoplasm, without touching the nucleus, it goes to a part of the body, it's called the ribrosome, and it tells that to just print. It's like telling them to 3D print a spike protein that is then released, and then your antibodies, your immune system will react to that. The mRNA is so fragile that it disappears, so it self-destructs. I think a good analogy would be like Mission Impossible, right? You have the recording. See, now you know how old I am. So after the recording, right, it tells you this is your mission, blah, blah, blah. And then this this message will self-destruct in 10, 9, and then you quickly run away before the thing explodes. So yeah, it's gone, right? It's not going to be around to disturb you or anything. So impossible that it will be around to, cause you to have a third arm or have adamantine bones or optic blast or spider sense.
Okay. So I think another question that would be quite relevant is can pregnant women take the COVID-19 vaccine?
I think in the early part of when the vaccine was rolled out in Malaysia, for a very brief moment in time, pregnant women were told that they cannot have the vaccine, they cannot take the vaccine. And this decision was based on the fact that in all the trials of these vaccines, they don't specifically focus on women who are pregnant. So they sort of picked up, how many thousands of people were actually pregnant. And then they report, they have no problem and not. So I think our government was very cautious, and so at one point they say no, they should not be taking the vaccine, right? And then enough water has passed under the bridge since then. I've often say, science evolve, we know more and more, and then as more and more data come in, and then they find that all of them are well, and then so now we are confident, we are more confident, and so we tell the people now that if you are pregnant, you can take the vaccine. It's safe for you, right? And I think the important message that the government is also trying to say is that yes, it is safe for you, and the benefit definitely outweighs the risk.
So basically, it comes down to risk versus benefit, right? So like Prof said, initially, because in a study you have your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, right, clinical trials, then they publish it. So happened, of course, they didn't actually do a study on pregnant women. So it wasn't recommended because it was not studied in pregnant women. So that was the issue. But so after you've approved a drug or a vaccine, then you come into phase 4 clinical trials, which is basically post-marketing surveillance. So after it's gone out to the public, what happens? They collect back the data. So what happens is when it comes to risk and benefit, we know that for sure, if you are pregnant and you get COVID-19, it is not good. The child might miscarry. It's not good for the mom, and you can't even take most of the medication. The other thing was that the risk was theoretically we knew for sure that most of the vaccines where you say you can't give to a pregnant woman were live vaccines. So if it's still inactivated, like your flu vaccine, you can take when you're pregnant, for example. You wouldn't give polio vaccine to a pregnant lady, things like that. So we know the precedence is that we know that some vaccines are safe in pregnant, number one. So risk and benefit, who are at risk, right? So it turns out that there were a lot of nurses and doctors who were pregnant at that time, and they were looking at all their friends who got the Pfizer vaccine. It's like, no, we're being left behind because we still have to go to work. We have nurses in the ICU, in the COVID wards who were pregnant anyway. So they were like, no, I don't care. I want to take the vaccine. I'll take whatever risk. And because so many of them took it, that's where the data they collected for post-marketing surveillance. And I think the data was very convincing that nothing bad happened to these people who took the vaccine. I think initially in Malaysia, when they said ladies who are pregnant can't take it, there were a lot of backlash because there were some doctors who were pregnant, nurses who were pregnant, who wanted the vaccine. And they were like, who are you to tell me I can't take the vaccine because I'm at a higher risk of getting COVID-19. And because of that, now we have data, and the data shows that it's quite safe. That's why they changed their stance about.
Yep. Just like what we were talking about earlier, when there's new information that surfaces, we can change our stance based on that data, as long as it's rational and logical and it makes sense. Okay. One more. Okay. Ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, zinc, vitamin C, D, bleach, warm water, if you will. how does the evidence stack up for the current existing treatments for COVID-19? Do they actually work? Is there anything which works better than the other? Arguably, I think that this is a very inpatient, or rather, is in the domain
definitely in the domain of Prof. Infectious disease.
Yeah.
Not really. Yeah. Well, I think in the early days of the pandemic last year, I think we have tried so many things, and so many people have recommended this or that. Even our health minister have recommended drinking warm water, and he was ridiculed for it. Of course, later on that advice had become a meme, and then he got ridiculed. I mean, anyway, that aside, similarly, in the early days, we have tried a lot of medications, and doctors everywhere in the world were trying different kinds of treatment for COVID and see whether it works. And then results were coming in from all over the place, and some say it works, some say it doesn't work. So among all these things were some nice sounding medication, like protease inhibitors, HIV medications. Ivermectin is another one, to rather surprising or shocking recommendations like Bleach and stuff like that. And in between, we'll have all sorts of vitamins that has been put forward as being useful, high dose vitamin C and D and all that. So yeah, I guess those days we were desperate. We were trying to find a cure using whatever we have in the cupboard, I guess. Then people started to analyze all these reports, and then trying to make sense out of it, and then decide once and for all whether they work or they don't work. And so over the months and even the past year, a lot of these medications or efficacy have been brought into question. That we some of it are really questionable, and we really don't think that they work. Right? Still, we are trying. And in fact, if you read news, every now and then there will be a new treatment, so-called new, but actually the medications have been with us for the longest time. It's just that, they're trying out, see whether it works or not. So
are
this
there
will
any? Yep, yeah. Prof. Are there any new medications that are, to your knowledge, are being developed that show promise?
Oh, well, was it Pfizer or what who said that by next year you just need to pop a pill? Today's news.
Right. Yes, I think I saw something like that.
I think it was Merck.
Merck. I can't remember which company.
I think it was Merck. Molnupiravir.
You don't have to go to the hospital anymore. You just need to pop a pill. I hope that will come.
It's called Molnupiravir.
It's it's a type of antiviral.
It's an antiviral that they're working on by Merck.
Quite a mouthful there. Right?
Yeah.
So again, look at all the evidence and then decide for yourself what would work and what wouldn't. What we do know work in is that we do use steroids, corticosteroids for category 3 and 4 patients. In COVID severity, there's category 1, 2, 3, and 4. 3 and 4 being quite serious, and corticosteroids seem to show that people do survive better with that, and we do use that. Right? But other than that, I'm not aware of anything that would significantly bring about improvement.
Okay.
Certainly nothing over the counter.
Yep. Noted. Well noted.
Certainly nothing over the counter. Yeah.
It's going to take a while before the research and development catches up to the point where it's something like influenza. Oh, you got influenza, you diagnosed early, you can take oseltamivir, and then, end of story.
Tamiflu.
Tamiflu. But anyway, okay, so I think just the final question, just to wrap up. We were talking a lot about the variants and the rate of which we need to vaccinate, and that, you know, we're working against the clock here and so on. How confident are we, you know, how effective are the current vaccines going to be against these new emerging mutations? And I guess as an extension of this question, what is our take home from here?
Yeah.
It's a bit like models of phones, I guess. You know, I remember I have a Nokia which I was super proud of, and it was really expensive actually. And you know, you use that Nokia phone, and now you ask me to use a Nokia phone, I will never go back to it, right? Because it doesn't do all the things that I want it to do. But does it help me to communicate? Yes, it does. Can I send a message? Yes, it does. You know. So what we have now is a vaccine in its first generation. What we have now on hand, Pfizer, SinoVac, AstraZeneca, whatever, they're all first generation. They're a bit like our Nokia, right? Can it do all the things that it will do in 20 years? I wouldn't know, right? But at the moment, what it can do is it prevents death and severity, and I think that's good. And I do believe that in the months and years to come, we will have better and better versions of the vaccine. You may not even need to inject it. You may need to sniff it, or you may just pop a pill, you know, or they could maybe even find a cure for it. You know? So yeah. So am I going to say when I was a Nokia user that, look, you know, my Nokia phone is so useless. It can't, you know, Google. It can't, you know, take a photo. It can't edit or play music. You know. I can't go on Spotify with it. Therefore, I don't want to use a phone. You know? That's how that would be a very stupid person, I would think. You know? So I think the take-home message is that's all we have at the moment, and what we have now works, right? And we can expect better and better versions in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah. Okay. For those who know me, I'm actually quite a skeptic lah. So I'm quite negative about most things. And to be honest, I really don't believe we'll ever hit herd immunity, because you would expect about 80% of the population, the world population, to get vaccinated. But because of the prominence of misinformation, because of internet, because of social media, because of Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. Twitter is one of the worst places on the face of social media earth. We will never get herd immunity. I hope time will prove me wrong, but let's end on a positive note. All right. So we have new variants. Yes. A lot of people are scared, right? The talks about headlines saying that the vaccines have been less effective against these variants, but what they don't tell you is it's less effective in preventing mild illness. But most of these vaccines are very effective in preventing severe illness, hospitalization, and death, even in these variants of concern. So vaccines work. And how you know vaccines work? Look at countries where they've really vaccinated everyone. All right. So Worldometer, that's the website you go to find out how many cases there are right now in the world and how many daily cases and all that. Go to Worldometer and then look under Israel. All right. Israel is a very small country. I think population, Prof, do you know? I'm not sure. I think it was a very small population only, from what I know. All right. But at one point, at September, and then another peak, their second wave somewhere near December, the highest point they hit about 11,000 odd cases a day. And around that time, they started vaccinating. We know right now that Israel, they only take Pfizer, and right now about more than 50% of their population has been vaccinated against this illness. And if you just look at that graph, it's beautiful. It's like whoosh, coming down. And to date, I think like the last few days, their cases are like 100 odd cases a day, 300 cases, and then back to 100 something. Can you imagine 11,000, 100 cases? So much better than Malaysia right now. We're like 3,000 hitting 4,000, right?
Yeah.
So if we vaccinate, I truly, although I'm a skeptic, but I truly believe that vaccines will be the way out of this pandemic. You even look at US. Remember, US is so weird, right? Cases were really bad. They're still number one. But you look at the daily new case graph, it is also starting to come down. So,
I think more often than not, when you look at developing countries like Malaysia, where sometimes access to equal healthcare and so on may be a bit of a challenge, depending on your location and so on. I think the real challenge now is actually that yes, some people vaccinated, some people not. The key take-home message is that in order to reach that herd immunity, we need to buy more time. So when we need to buy more time, social responsibility is really something that needs to be taken into account. People need to follow the SOPs. People need to do their social distancing and wear their masks, wash their hands, take it seriously. Because if we don't, we're going to run out of time, basically. And basically, the healthcare system is going to get overrun by the caseload. So to me, it's really a challenge of integrity, if nothing else. It's a challenge of community integrity and your responsibility to your people. Okay, I'll end on that.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Okay, that's a wrap, I guess.